In April 1968, a politician called Enoch Powell made an inflammatory speech, which, although it had some elements in it that were perfectly true, rational and reasonable, destroyed the British immigration policy until today. He did incalculable damage. I'm Graniopteryx. The subject of Enoch Powell keeps coming up in the comments under my videos, and recently Mahia Tusi actually made reference to Enoch Powell as well. He's coming up more and more. He is not the Nazi that the MSM portray, and I'm going to talk about the MSM as well. But first, I'm going to show you what is the... First of all, I'm going to show you why Mahia Tusi brought the subject up. And this is a video not from the MSM, but from, obviously, from someone who's in an apartment or an office above where this is happening. So let's play this. I think you've seen enough to realise it's mayhem. It's two different groups of Eritreans from different sides of a political divide, and they're having a go at each other, and the police turned up. Originally, the police turned up without riot gear. I think if you look here, you'll see a policeman. I think that must be a policeman in ordinary uniform. A bit later on, you'll see pictures of police in riot gear, but not the first responders by the looks of things. So the council, the government, whatever, are completely unprepared for this sort of activity. And the only mainstream thing I've seen reporting it is here in the metro. Eritrean protesters attack riot cops with sticks in South London. And this is a picture of what was going on. And here are later on some police in the riot vans with the correct uniforms on, but that wasn't the first pictures. If you look here, you'll see, let's see if I can find it. These aren't riot vans, these are just ordinary police vehicles. So they weren't prepared for this. Now, you may ask why we should be prepared for this, and I would say we don't have to be. Those guys probably shouldn't be here. They look like your standard idea where you get a lot of young men without the control of family or even women, and they just fight each other. That's what young men do in such situations. They do it even if they weren't Eritrean, but politics are a little more violent in countries like Eritrea. Or I don't know whether you could actually call Eritrea a country, really, at the state it is now. And as for the MSM, let's see how many of them are reporting this. This is a video I took of the page that dealt with this. So let's just play it. It's GB News, you see, GB News. This is what are the Eritreans fighting about? That's Deutsche Welle, a German television company. This is NBC News. This is Africa News. This is 5 months ago, German. And this is a report, this is interesting. This is a report from The Guardian. And The Guardian is reporting about trouble in Eritrea, or Eritrean immigrants, but not Eritrean immigrants to Britain, but Eritrean immigrants to Israel. So they're showing the Eritreans misbehaving there. They're misbehaving, as you see, in Germany as well. But the whole point is that you see Tel Aviv, This is Sky News. They're reporting, and they're reporting on what's happening in Israel with the Eritreans. Do you see anything about this latest here? No, not at all. That's NBC again, and this is CTV, whatever. Oh, Canada, of course. And so you see the MSM are studiously avoiding this issue with Eritreans, just like they studiously avoid issue with, Pakistanis here and riots between Hindus and Pakistanis. Hindus, by the way, are, I'd say, really mostly peaceful. But of course, if you're being attacked by another group from, let's say, another religion, you either let yourself get walked over or you fight back. And that's what seemed to be happening in the Birmingham riots last year between Hindus and Muslims. And what we're seeing now is riots between different groups from different countries who have brought their politics to our streets. And that's the problem. Now I'm going to get back to Enoch Powell. As I said, he isn't the Nazi that the MSM portray, but you can see from the examples I've just given you that the MSM would rather not talk about anything to do either with him or the issues he raised. I think Powell was wrong, but for reasons I shall explain as this video progresses. For those of you who don't know exactly what's happened, it was as follows. In 1968, Powell makes a speech to the local Conservative Association in which he said he'd received a complaint from a constituent that she was being bullied by kids, youngsters, from the West Indians who'd settled in large numbers in her neighbourhood. So the neighbourhood had been one of those white flight things, and she was left in a dilapidated house and surrounded by a lot of West Indians whom she did not like. We have to put it... Oh, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. Just a minute. And I'm interrupting myself to remind you to click like, to share the video and to subscribe. Remember, YouTube drops subscriptions all the time. So if you think you're subscribed, just check that out. But please click like, it helps the video, the algorithm, whatever that is. All the links to my other channels are in the description, including links to donation sites. If you want to donate, I'm always grateful for donations, of course, because I earn next to nothing from YouTube. However, the best way you can help this video and my channel, just click like, and that doesn't cost you a bean. Okay. Yeah, I've closed that off. I hope whoever it is doesn't try ringing me again. Anyway, this woman was made this complaint to Powell, and he used her example. He said the kids followed her, shouting at the time the word racialist at her, taunting her with that. It turns out that the woman wasn't entirely innocent in this regard, but that doesn't matter. He was concerned about what was happening to her, and he could see problems ahead. He was very much aware of the friction that was being caused. And then he made this speech about the dangers of immigration. But his speech concentrated mostly on the well, basically the skin colour of the immigrants, the West Indians. And that was wrong in itself, because the people who'd come over here were basically English culture, whatever their skin colour. Now, I know that some of the comments underneath my videos will say, England for the English, and you have the right to that opinion. It won't work in this society, in this current culture, world image we have. I'm not talking about the New World Order. I'm just talking about better communications. But what definitely we can all complain about is the refusal of some cultures to assimilate into British society, to improve British society, and to jettison their old political opinions and ways of doing things, ways of conducting their lives, like these Eritreans. They just brought Eritrea to London, and in that respect, although I'm not sure that Powell was actually talking about that, but in that respect, he was right. During that speech, then, he quoted from Virgil, the Roman poet, which is something you shouldn't do without a lot of explanation, because most people haven't read any Virgil, and that was where he went wrong. First of all, look, Powell was a very intelligent man. He got a first-class degree in classics from Trinity College, Cambridge, for goodness sake. And with all that intelligence and his knowledge of classics, you'd think he'd have known something about hubris, wouldn't you? Hubris, by the way, is the situation where you get so big and inflated that the gods slap you down. And that's exactly what happened with him. His problem was that he couldn't resist showing off his classical education. And when he spoke out about the dangers of immigration, and there are dangers, of course, he actually knew what he was doing. That's the worst of it. It wasn't an honest mistake. He contacted the editor of a local newspaper before he made the speech. And it was as follows. I'm going to make a speech at the weekend, he says, and it's going to go up fizz like a rocket, which seems to me like a rather schoolboyish way of putting things and might betray something of the sort of schoolboyish attitude he might have had. But whereas, he says, all rockets fall to the earth, this one is going to stay up. And this was the part of the speech that caught the attention of everyone. What he said was, as I look ahead, I am filled with foreboding, like the Roman. And there again, who would know which Roman he was talking about at that point? Anyway, he says, like the Roman, I seem to see the river Tiber foaming with much blood. And then he continues, that tragic and intractable phenomenon which we watch with horror on the other side of the Atlantic, but which there is interwoven with the history and existence of the states itself, is coming upon us here by our own volition and our own neglect. So he was referring to the racial tensions which were really bad. This was 68, remember, in the United States. And that was wrong because those tensions had to do with Jim Crow. And we didn't have any such thing over here. So it's not the same thing. And he shouldn't have been bringing that up. He might have mentioned it as a social phenomenon, but not as a predictor of burnt out buildings and civil war in Britain. Although, in my opinion, he has caused what he predicted. He must have known that the rivers of blood reference that would overshadow everything else. That would be what the papers would get hold of. And indeed, they did. The rest of the message, while we're talking about rivers of blood, was actually drowned out. So everything else he'd said was completely overpowered by this rivers of blood imagery, which is an apocalyptic imagery, and nobody wants that. And a lot of people were shocked. And that was his tragedy and ours. Because when he brought up this rivers of blood thing, the government, of course, had to immediately put a cap on it. They didn't want that to start riots. And you know what? I'm sort of thinking that maybe that might have been in the back of his mind. And that's a very evil thing to think of. You know, there are ways of absorbing immigrants, and the British government, every British government since the 1950s has not done the right thing for absorbing or assimilating immigrants and controlling immigration generally. And they have caused a lot of trouble. Of course, the Blair government made it worse, and I don't think they were affected by Powell. They were just affected by their own idealism, which was not ideal. But the Conservative governments have been terrified of being associated with the Powell Rivers of Blood stuff ever since, and that has crippled them. And this is Powell. That was Powell's tragedy. And it has become our tragedy. And it's a very sad thing, and it's Powell's fault, and I blame him for that. And that's why I don't think he was a great man, although he did have a great brain. And when he was consigned to the backbenches, he spent many years as a very good backbench MP. It was just a shame that speech was ever given, and his excitement about causing a huge social revolution. That doesn't work in this country. Well, it didn't work then. I'm not so sure about now, of course. Okay, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.